Vamos. Vamos por acá. Sí, por la izquierda. Vamos a esta misma velocidad. Pégate ahí, por la mitad pasa, por la mitad pasa. Y este de aquí, ve. Hay un montón. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Winds over 125 miles an hour. Storm surges and as much as 30 inches of rain could bring life-threatening floods.
Science geek, so coming to the Galapagos Islands is like the ultimate candy store for me. I'm just geeking out. There's just so much to absorb here. I'm just gonna chill on the side of the road.
People are walking by him. He just does not care.
The Galapagos Islands, located 500 miles off the coast of Ecuador, is home to animals that don't exist anywhere else in the world. Animals so unique that they inspired Charles Darwin to formulate the theory of evolution over 150 years ago. Animals like this dinosaur-like marine iguana, whose ancestors lived exclusively on land, but somehow adapted to swimming and feeding in water.
Holy shit! They're everywhere. Okay, now they've cornered me.
Like every other species inhabiting Earth today, this iguana is the result of evolution, driven in large part by environmental and climate-related changes. A process that took nearly 10 million years, well before human beings walked the Earth. But human activity has forever altered this natural process.
We're talking about evolutionary changes that are typically measured on the order of
hundreds
eons.
to thousands to millions.
And now we're talking about
So it's a
years.
major new perspective in evolutionary biology and ecology, because it's forcing ecologists like me to think about adaptation and natural selection on the period of 10 years or so. Wow. So that's rapid.
Marine biologist John Whitman from Brown University comes to the Galapagos regularly to monitor how accelerated climate change is affecting the evolutionary process.
Evolution's working all the time. I mean, there's acclimation to an environmental stress. That's going on in the marine environment. I've worked all over the world underwater, and I consider this the most dynamic marine environment I've ever worked in. It's been stated that the Galapagos is a natural laboratory for evolution, and we're saying that it's a natural laboratory for studying climate change and evolutionary responses to climate change, which has been greatly understudied in the ocean compared to land. We dive before breakfast so we can get a full round of 4 dives in for the day. So we usually start around 6:30. And it's dive, eat, repeat.
John's team examines the health of coral reefs to try and determine how changes in water temperature may be shaping changes in marine species.
What we're checking for is evidence of long-term change at all these locations that we visit. And we can study repeated effects of the El Niño system, which is the greatest modulator of climate on the planet.
John's Galapagos research looks at the impact of a complex weather phenomenon known as El Niño. One effect is a warming of the Pacific Ocean waters, which stresses and devastates marine populations. El Niño is followed by its counterpart La Niña, which cools the water, bringing nutrient-rich waters that foster the growth and recovery of marine ecosystems. This roller coaster-like cycle tests the resilience of animals to withstand these highs and lows.
From the temperature changes, we can infer whether the animals on the bottom, the species encrusting the walls of the fish, are experiencing temperature stress. So we're following the cycles of stress and recovery of the whole system.
Coral reefs are the barometers of the ocean's health. Vibrant, colorful coral indicates that the coral are alive and healthy. 90% of marine species, from algae all the way up the food chain, rely on the habitat of coral reefs. But it will bleach or die if the water becomes too warm or too cold, turning white and barren like a moonscape. All life around it disappears.
Let's go to the one of the iconic corals at the end. Just in the last year, we've been developing these photo mosaics of our coral plots. So that big one in the center, I've tracked it through 3 bleaching episodes and it keeps coming back, so I'm happy about that.
This particular ecosystem is showing remarkable resilience to temperature swings. But John is concerned about evidence that climate change may make the naturally occurring El Niño and La Niña cycles more frequent and more extreme, and push nature's resilience to a breaking point.
Given the number of changes and the rapid pace of change that's happening today due to climate change, do you think that Mother Nature and animals are resistant or resilient enough to deal with what we're seeing today?
Well, you hit it on the head. That's a $64 million question that we want to answer. Yes and no. I think the no part is that the El Niño stress may recur so frequently that the species that are stressed don't have enough time to recover before the next El Niño comes. There's no doubt we're in an unprecedented period of global stress in terms of climate impacts. And basically the natural world is being hit by what I call the big 3. Certainly climate change is up there. Habitat destruction by humans is absolutely key, and we're also adding pollution to the ecosystem. Sounds pretty grim, and it is grim.
Please follow me.
Currently, the planet is experiencing one of the greatest extinction events since the dinosaurs disappeared 65 million years ago. Extinction is a natural phenomenon, resulting in the loss of 1 to 5 species each year. But today, dozens of species are being erased, every single day.
We're worried what's happening in the planet. The planet is just one house for everybody, for every species.
Gustavo Jimenez is a researcher from the Charles Darwin Foundation in the Galapagos. His work focuses on the small penguin population on the islands. He's here to survey the health of the animals, and more importantly, to see whether they are breeding.
So what does a nest look like?
It's like I could say a cave.
And then a nest is home for like how many penguins?
Usually 2.
So the pairs stay together, the couples stay
Yeah,
together?
the couple stay together.
Are they having to build higher up?
That's the problem for the climate change. We know they migrate to the other areas.
So they're somewhat adaptable.
Yeah, exactly. That's important.
But while we were looking for penguins, it was hard not to marvel at everything else around us.
This is where a vast majority of the species endemic to this island chain are found. There are over 150 islands and islets here in the Galapagos archipelago. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are uninhabitable by humans simply because they're nothing more than a collection of rock jutting out from the floor. And these are really jagged cliffs. Holy shit.
Qué grande, ¿no? That's a cormorant.
Is that the flightless cormorant?
The flightless cormorant.
Oh, right over here. A bird that does not fly.
Yeah, it's like the penguin.
This is like an oddity of evolution.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a bird, you have feathers, but you can't fly.
Yeah.
This species, the only cormorant that cannot fly, lost its ability to fly to take advantage of all the food right off these jagged rocks. It adapted to become a strong swimmer and no longer needed to fly to survive.
At every turn, you look at these different animals and you're sort of forced to think about why certain evolutionary traits are present in each individual animal, because so much of what they are, how they look, is based on some sort of adaptation to their natural environment to allow them to survive. And that guy is just showing off for the cameras now. Look at that. I've just been photobombed by a sea lion.
Following an afternoon spent in the water, the penguins return to the rocky islets. It's an opportunity for Gustavo to catch and gather important information about their health.
What's going to happen is that Gustavo and his team are going to get into a small zodiac and just circle this islet here. And if they spot any penguins, they're literally going to jump out of their boats and catch these penguins with these nets. You know, in this age of technology, I was expecting some high-tech approach.
Todo tuyo. Ya salta. Yeah, we have one.
Muy bien. This is straight up local dog catcher, but it works.
Ahí están dos, ahí están dos.
There are less than 1,000 Galapagos penguins, which are officially listed as an endangered species. Gustavo and his team try to capture them, and they work day and night to do so.
Ya, un, dos, tres, go.
The data Gustavo gathers becomes critical to understanding how the changing climate may be affecting feeding and breeding patterns, and help find clues that may ultimately lead to evolutionary, physiological changes in the species.
This little guy's disoriented. All the tests that they need to perform on him have been done. They brought him over here so that he would jump back into the water, but he's checking out the boat. You are ridiculously cute. They're not that bright. I have a feeling he's gonna figure it out. How did the penguin end up all the way up here? Because the penguin you usually see in very cold climates. What is it doing here?
The adaptation was incredible if you compare with other penguins around the world, because here is hotter if compared with the south. They adapted because they find food, they don't have many predators, and it's very nice to live here.
The penguin itself is an evolutionary marvel that somehow, over millions of years, figured out how to adapt to its environment. Gustavo believes that in small, incremental ways, it's continuing to adapt to its ever-changing surroundings. But this time around, it may not have millions of years to figure it out.
Maybe the time is smaller than before, and the problem is how they could adapt. They could have that adaptation in the short time.
Do you feel a closeness to them? Like you feel like you have to protect them?
You feel close to the species you study. You are like the father or you are the helper of them. The idea is to prepare the better way to the future. Well, there are my kids, my children. Yeah, I'm worried in the future.
Though the idea of losing beloved animals may be hard to bear, scientists are aware some species may be better equipped to adapt in this period of environmental uncertainty.
So can you walk me through what we're going to be doing today?
We want to catch as many Darwin's finches as possible. So the way we do this catching, we use what is called mist nets. So it's pretty much a volleyball net made out of very fine nylon thread. And we're going to analyze and collect the data on their morphology, that is how different their beaks are.
Now, why are you interested in the beak shape?
The beak shape is one of those traits in birds that is so key because it would determine the fate of that group.
So based on what we're going to see today, you can take a snapshot of evolution
Absolutely.
and see where these birds are headed.
Yes. So you can imagine this as a tape of evolution, and you can press forward in many of these stages. So we can see evolution in action. We have found a spot down here that has worked very well in the past days.
912?
Sure.
Jaime Chavez is a researcher, a self-described bird geek. He and his students are looking for Darwin's finches, the very species that inspired Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, in 1849.
So the more steel the net is, the more effective it's going to be to catching these guys.
Jaime believes finches may be key to seeing and understanding how environmentally driven evolution can shape all species in the future.
So, this is kind of like a distress song for the birds, just to attract the birds into the net. We don't use it that often. You don't want to use it repeatedly. So we already caught one. So let's go and check it out. Can I have a bird bag, please? This is the famous Darwin finch, and this is one of the ground finches, which are the birds that are feeding on seeds on the ground, mostly. But as you guys see, they're also feeding on these other resources. And because of the size of the beak, you can tell this is this is the smallest species of ground finches. Like a little bag. So they don't stress out, and we can continue this process.
Just as we were talking, 5 more finches got in the nets here.
Jaime is the only person here allowed to touch the birds, a strict policy meant to limit the human footprint on wildlife.
So we are going to be taking note on the band, the species, the sex, length, width, and height. These are 3 measurements that I take of the beak.
So peaceful.
Yeah, and we're talking about like maybe 1 millimeter difference.
Yeah,
but that
it's
can
huge.
determine if one lineage lives or dies, right? So it might be super small measurements, but that's enough if you have one type of seed that is more abundant than the other.
Right. But those subtle differences can determine whether you survive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we're measuring that. And here you can see that it's a slight difference between this guy here, maybe a little bit larger on the length compared to this one here. And these are the same species, right? These are certainly the same species. 7.0.
Jaime and his students are examining the beaks of finches and tracking their shapes and sizes year after year,
9.5.
which seem to change based on the varieties of food available to them. In effect, creating a small but significant evolutionary adaptation,
6.9.
while the birds with inadequate beaks simply die.
So we can let it go. All right. It's not ready to go.
From a real evolutionary standpoint, it's just it's a moment.
Right, it's like a blink of the eye, right? 2-3 generations. These birds breed every year. So in 3-4 years, we can have already the initiation of a new species. In so little time, you can see evolution in action.
The team's observations suggest this species' remarkable shape-shifting ability may make it uniquely primed to succeed in coming generations.
Okay, I need another person to help with color bands. Many other species that when you have changes in the environment, they don't have the time enough to respond. We've seen species being formed in the last 5 years. We've seen species disappearing in the last 20 years.
In 2017, researchers discovered that an entirely new species had just recently been created when a wayward bird mated with a finch species and produced offspring.
In the global context, we're going to be seeing more species interacting to each other. Species are migrating. You will probably see an interbreeding and a fusion of two species into one.
As nature marches forward, the animals that inhabit the Earth in the future may look drastically different than what we see today. It's no longer enough for animals to evolve. They have to adapt now, adapt fast, or die.
I think that humans, we have a tendency to be precious about, let's say, the animals that we've grown attached to. But if you divorce yourself from that sentimentality and you think objectively as a scientist that these extinctions are normal, and these animals that we are so in love with are in fact the product of climate change over the years and evolution. Isn't what we're seeing right now just history and nature just marching on?
You can see the same process and mechanism operating, and species, some of them responding to those as they have done in the past. I think the issue right now that we have is that the changes are happening in such a short period of time. The same amount of change that you've seen happening in a couple of millions of years has happened in the last 40 years. From our perspective of humans, we have to understand that it's under our responsibility that these changes are happening because our own mishandling of the planet. Many species will not be able to make it. Several will.